a par with we. A good time is guaranteed. Build up your vibes and get tired. Tonight we are going to touch a party.
This Jackie, pull up that one, bigger that one.
The music has no bearing on the next session, nor on the conference on a whole. In fact, the views expressed in the song are not necessarily those of the ACHEA conference. But on a post-lunch session on day 2 of a conference, what other choice do I have? It's either a Christopher Martin dance hall or a Marshall Montano family. Good afternoon, everyone. Now that I have your attention, in a very captive manner, I suppose, we can now proceed with our presentation. Higher education has always played an important role in societies globally because it is through higher education that people are equipped to lead, innovate, and execute in various sectors of their societies, thereby making life better and more meaningful to fellow citizens. Affordability of higher education is important because in addition to facilitating the existence and development of societies, it directly facilitates the development of individuals. Higher education, by its nature, supports and grapples with the issue of continuing access to the poor and vulnerable who are not able to afford the high costs associated with higher education. It is within this context that provisions have been made by student loan systems with the sole purpose of enabling poor and vulnerable students to access higher education institutions. Access is important, especially for the poor who do not possess the financial resources required to enroll in programs offered by the higher education institution. The next presentation, therefore, will examine the role of student loan systems in financing higher education in the Anglophone Caribbean. Included in the presentation will be the different types of student loan systems, such as mortgage types and loan schemes, and the income contingent loan scheme, and how they impact access to and affordability of higher education in the region and the global context. So, may I present to you our speaker, Dr. Roger Nesbeth, JP. Is a Senior Assistant Registrar in charge of HR operations, Jamaica, and the UWI 14 at the global campus, the University of the West Indies, UWI Mona. Is also the officer in charge of the Global Learning Center, the global campus at UWI Mona. Dr. Nesbeth has served as a research supervisor in the Doctor of Education program at UWI Global Campus, as a seminar presenter, locally in Jamaica and regionally across the Caribbean, and also as a conference presenter locally, regionally, and internationally. He is an experienced educator and administrator with over 41 years in service in education and general management, 30 of which has been in higher education administration and HR administration through his work in the HR Registry, UWI Mona campus, the Regional Coordinating Office, the Institute of Gender and Development Studies, UWI Regional Headquarters, and the Global Campus UWI. His academic qualifications include the Doctor of Education degree from the University of Sheffield in the UK, the Master of Arts degree in Heritage Studies from UWI, the Diploma in Human Resource Management from the Jamaica Institute of Management, the Bachelor of Arts degree in History with Social Science Honors from UWI. is also a Mico University College graduate. Dr. Nesbeth's research interests are human resource management in the higher education institutions, higher education administration, organizational change in higher education, administrative systems, and the new management or corporate management, new public management in higher education administrative systems. Dr. Nesbeth has interests in local and global current and political affairs. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Roger Nesbeth, JP.
Thank you, Dr. Garrick, for your introduction. Good afternoon, colleagues. It is good to be here, and the topic itself is one which is very relevant. Bear in mind the issues that we face and the fact that higher education in the region is one which is very, very important. And you will see that in the discussion this afternoon. So we look at the role of student loan systems in financing higher education in the Anglophone Caribbean. Introduction. Go ahead. Oh. Hush. All right, hush. Okay. Right. So, by way of introduction, this paper will discuss the role of student loan systems in financing higher education. And we'll look by way of context at the discussion of the key terms, student loan systems, higher education, and the Anglophone Caribbean. Student loan systems are financial institutions that specialize in the provision of financing for HE. Student loan systems exist in countries in the Anglophone Caribbean and are called by different names: Student Revolving Loan Fund in Barbados, Student Loans Bureau in Jamaica, Student Loan Scheme in the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and the Student Revolving Loan in TNT. Higher education is the third stage of education and is also called tertiary education. It builds on knowledge, skills, and competencies of secondary education, and it's delivered to young and older adults through undergraduate and graduate offerings in or from universities, university colleges, and other similar institutions on a full-time or part-time basis. It's offered via face-to-face or online modes. It's voluntary in nature and student-centered in orientation. It caters to the intellectual, social, and occupational needs of young and older learners. And it prepares them to function as adaptive and productive citizens in a global environment. And the Anglophone Caribbean, most of you are domiciled here in the Anglophone Caribbean, former dependents, former colonies rather of Britain. They are still dependent territories within the region: Cayman, Anguilla, BVI, Turks and Caicos. And the others are independent nations, as you know. So we look at the development of higher education globally. So before the existence of the modern university, which surfaced in Europe in the 12th century, higher-level instruction took the form of students hiring teachers. Students in India attended the homes of Brahmin scholars who were hired and paid based on their academic and moral reputation. In ancient Greece, students paid itinerant scholars for moral scientific training that prepared them for participation in the political life of the polis. In the Islamic world, students hired teachers inside the mosque for religious instructions, and during the first and second centuries, the Romans developed the study of law, which was very important in preserving order throughout the Roman Empire. Emperors provided financial support to higher education and endowments for particular chairs. A principal motivation for this support was the provision of a highly trained elite that could help in the management of the empire. During the Renaissance period, it facilitated further development of the ACHEA institutions, financed mainly by the Catholic Church and students. And so with the emergence of the Industrial Revolution came the first instances of largely state-supported universities in Germany and France in the 19th century. State intervention was necessary as technical manpower for the state was needed to promote industrial development. Other European countries followed this trend by establishing publicly supported national university systems. So universities became employer-based training facilities with the government as a primary employer, meeting educational costs. And as you can imagine, universities were established rapidly in the 19th century as more countries sought to industrialize. So the pattern of publicly supported institutions to provide administration and technical manpower was exported to many developing countries that were colonies of European powers. So between the 19th century and the early 20th century, say in 1940s and the 1970s, when many colonies became independent, the structure of university systems was already in place, and most governments expanded these institutions rapidly to replace the human resource void created by the withdrawal of their former colonial masters. Now, higher education has an important mission to generate new knowledge and prepare graduates for positions of leadership and responsibility in a rapidly changing and increasingly complex and competitive world. So we look now at the development of higher education in the Anglophone Caribbean. Codrington College is the first higher education institution in the Anglophone Caribbean. It was converted from a grammar school in 1830 to a theological college. At the HE level, the patterns in North America and the Anglophone Caribbean diverged sharply, as colleges were established in North America soon after elementary schools were established. Harvard in 1636, William and Mary in 1693, Yale in 1701, Princeton in 1746, among others later on. In the Anglophone Caribbean, during the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, the practice was for those who could afford it to send their sons to England to university. And you know who we mean by those. Hence, the lack of HE provision in the region. Kamar Brathwaite, in his study of colonial Creole society in Jamaica, showed that between 1770 and 1820, 229 Jamaicans went to Oxford and Cambridge. And this practice, Miller noted as well as Wint, mirrored the common pattern throughout the West Indian colonies. Sherlock and Nettleford note that during the first half of the 17th century, the Spanish established universities in Santo Domingo, Mexico, and Lima. In the second half of the 17th century, Spain established 5 more universities in its New World colonies and founded 10 more universities during the 18th century. The majority of colonies in North America and Latin America, based on the large landmass, they planned to make the New World their home. Hence, they brought with them the social infrastructure of community and intellectual advancement. The West Indian colonies, on the other hand, were a locale of exploitation in which the majority of colonists planned to make a quick fortune and return to Britain to enjoy their newfound wealth. As such, no long-term provisions were made for either community or intellectual advancement, noted by Miller. The provisions for education then in the Anglophone Caribbean improved with the advent of adult suffrage in 1944, representative government, and the independence movement. And so the imperative to expand HE was encouraged by the anticipated demands for local leaders, professionals, and technocrats in the newly formed nation states and the semi-autonomous dependencies. So in 1948, the University College attached to the University of London, was formed, and it was granted full autonomy status in 1962. It later expanded to 5 campuses. In Jamaica, where it first started, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, the home campus, now the global campus, which is the virtual arm of the system, and recently the 5 Islands campus in Antigua. And obviously, the global campus is the manifestation of this UWI project, where there is presence in all of the Eastern Caribbean territories, as well as Bahamas and Belize. By way of further expansion, in 1958, the College of Arts, Science and Technology, CAS, was established in Jamaica, and in the early 1990s, it was expanded and rebranded to the University of Technology, Jamaica, and it also became a degree granting institution. So between the 1960s and the present, a wide variety of HE institutions have been established, serving mainly particular occupations. So these include teachers' colleges, technical colleges, schools of nursing, physiotherapy, among others. Also with this is an emergence of a wide variety of articulations, accreditations, affiliations, and franchising arrangements linking different colleges with universities within the region as an attempt to expand the offerings of the higher education system within the region. And this essentially resulted in the strengthening of the higher education system. And so even though private higher education institutions have carved out a niche in the sector, it is the public resources and provision that have driven the post-war and post-independence transformation of higher education in the region. In the 1990s, UN data on gross tertiary enrollment status showed that Latin American countries had an average tertiary enrollment ratio of 19%. The equivalent ratio for the 4 large Anglophone territories, Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, and TNT, was 9%. And when you look at most developing countries outside of the newly industrializing countries of Asia, the tertiary enrollment ratios are extremely low. In the case of the Anglophone Caribbean, it's approximately 4% of the relevant age group. So we turn to looking at financing HE globally. Because you know the journey that we must take. You have to look at the bigger picture and then you zoom into the things so that you can see the connectivity and the relevance as well, just to show why we do what we do and how we can improve. So higher education institutions can thrive only if their funding levels are adequate, stable, and subject to good performance, World Bank 2000. Governments have a crucial role to play in providing stability. They must finance public institutions on a long-term basis. So regardless of the neoliberal talk that you hear, even from public universities and people in the private sphere, that, the lack of funds will dictate that they must be entrepreneurial and all of that thing. The fact of the matter is coming from our origins, not just in this region, but globally. Governments must play a role in that process. Not to say that we want not to be innovative and so forth, but we must also understand that this is a social responsibility. It's really not about profits when it comes to publicly funded institutions, but survival. And you need, one former prime minister in Jamaica said it takes cash to care, but you must know how to allocate it. Anyway, we thought I'd bring that in. So traditionally, government subsidies have been channeled to higher education institutions directly from ministries of education or finance, or from separate ministries of higher education, as is common in some African countries. And the intermediate funding agencies, or buffer agencies as they are also known, between a government and universities, with the aim of insulating the institution from direct government intervention. The British University Grants Committee is an example of this. And as times change and people look to different approaches, mainly neoliberal approaches, then you see public intervention taking a kind of decrease. Similar institutions exist in many British Commonwealth countries, Nigeria, Kenya, Pakistan, India, Hong Kong, as you know, it went back to China, New Zealand and Zimbabwe, other countries such as Israel and Sudan. Albrecht and Ziderman, they note that there are 3 funding methods that's accepted generally: payment by results, input method, negotiated funding. The payment by results funding allocation focuses on the input of the higher education system. The input method, funding allocated to universities according to the costs of higher education. And it's important that this method is designed carefully so that it may yield the desired results without compromising standards. For example, lowering entry standards just to bring in people. Negotiated funding, individual allocations are usually based on those of the previous year, perhaps augmented by a cross-the-board incremental increases, or more frequently according to power position or negotiating skills of the institutional agents. A review of the experience of 35 countries, mostly developing countries, show that the funds were allocated on a negotiated benefit basis. Private capital markets are unlikely to finance education fully in the absence of government intervention, and it's for this reason that researchers in developing countries have warned that it is critical for public sector to continue to play a major role in financing higher education. Charging tuition fees is the most significant avenue for increasing the proportion of privately financed higher education. And the development within the region noted by Wind is that it mirrors that of the global system, a mixture of both private and public provision. And so at various points in their history, governments in Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago paid the full cost for its students. Many students in the region have, institutions in the regions have been private, and it relied on the tuition to cover the full cost of their operations. So you have examples like Northern Caribbean University, formerly West Indies College in Mandeville, in Jamaica, and the University of the Southern Caribbean in Trinidad and Tobago. They are examples of successfully operated private higher education institutions, fully funded by tuition fees. We're looking at this student loan systems globally. Many countries have introduced the loan schemes covering the tuition and living expenses, or both, which are paid from subsequent earnings after graduation. And the student loan systems enable students who cannot afford education to contribute directly to their education. And this system was first implemented in Colombia in 1953 to assist graduate students to meet the costs of overseas study. So these student loan programs exist in over 50 developing and developed countries, 20 in Latin America and the Caribbean, 8 in Asia, 4 in the Middle East and Northern Africa, 7 in Sub-Saharan Africa, and 14 in industrialized countries. A high portion of students in industrialized countries receive between 20 and 80% of funding from these systems. And in developing countries, coverage is always less than 10% of the student population. And it's generally a low percentage of the overall population, both age group and otherwise. Many countries have no single loan program, and federated countries such as the USA and Canada have no single loan program. They have locally run systems. Canada has a national and provision loan schemes. In US, federal, state, and institutional loan programs. In Latin America, many countries have several loan programs that are sponsored by government departments, non-profit groups, and large companies. There are 4 forms of public intervention in the provision of student loan system: autonomous public lending bodies, commercial banks, private banks, use of existing government structures. Autonomous public lending bodies, once they are capitalized, they are expected to finance themselves through repayment from earlier loans. and they are also referred to as the revolving funds. And these bodies exist right across the board as the globe has stated. Commercial banks, as you all know, how they operate. In Brazil, for instance, the government owns a banking system, and that they have been managing the student loans since 1975. And this process of decentralization helps in making the process and collection more efficient. And public banks have been used in places like Indonesia, Pakistan, Barbados, Venezuela. Private banks have managed programs with and without government support in Canada, Denmark. There's also the case of the US as well. And there are reasons why governments use private banks. They don't have to make the initial capital outlay, and they can harness the efficiencies of the private sector and reduce the costs of a loan program. And they don't have to establish an administrative system to handle the processing. In Ghana and Australia, the government, they use a revenue collection system to recover loans, and we'll talk more about that later. In Ghana, it's managed by the Social Security Department. In Australia, the National Income Tax. In Ghana, for instance, the students repay the loans to the existing Social Security tax on all wage earning employees by deferring the accumulation of retirement benefits. Once a graduate is employed, the standard 5% payroll deduction plus the employer's 12% goes to the Ministry of Education rather than to the retirement benefit. And we're saying all of this because we have heard the horror stories in the different jurisdictions in the region about repayment, etc., and yet we don't have any fundamental change in how recovery is dealt with. And there are examples there for us to follow. In Australia, for instance, the Ministry of Education disburses the funds to students to cover fees, and repayment is through a graduated surplus income tax with outstanding debt assessed at 0% real interest rate, or tax rates of 1%, 2%, and 3%, depending on the income, individual income. So we look at the different types of student loan systems, the mortgage type systems, which we use in Jamaica and in other places in the region, the income contingent loans, and the graduated nominal payments. The mortgage type loans, repayment is made over a specified period, usually with fixed monthly payments. The income contingent loans, repayment is a proportion of the graduate's income each year. And we can see the benefits of that. It happens in Sweden. The graduated nominal payments, this method of student loan is used in the Chilean HE system. You see, countries and regions use the examples that we have here. They use it based on their experience, and it works for them. And other regions can look at them and, make the adjustments accordingly. A student loan system could include the low income contingent deferment clause in loan agreements. Countries like Sweden, Hong Kong, and Canada, the province of Quebec, they have this clause in their loan agreements. And so, as a result, they have low default rates. Those of us in Jamaica would remember the days when they used to publish delinquents in the popular newspapers, High administrative costs is another challenge, and initial processing costs, overall maintenance costs, and collection costs are high in many countries. So, more so in developing countries where loans are small and hence proportionately more costly to administer. In Sweden, Hong Kong, and Canada, the cost of loans ranges from 0.5% to 1% of outstanding debt each year. In Latin America, the cost ranges from 12% to 30%. So we move now to the region. Barbados. Student Revolving Fund, Loan Fund was established in 1977, statutory body operating under the Ministry of Education. It provides loans for tuition and other ancillary HE expenses up to 100,000. To accredited programs, of course. The funds approve 90% of applicants annually, and over 220 Barbadians benefiting annually. The means test is used to assist in screening applicants. The Eastern Caribbean Independent Territories, in 1972, the CDB established, the Caribbean Development Bank established a loan system to assist students. Between 1972 and 2003, the student loan system made over 99 loans valued at US 89 million. And these loans are made through different arrangements in the borrowing member countries. Over 5,000 students benefited from sub-loans valuing over US 49 million between 1999 and 2003. Surveys of student borrowers and showed that they had concerns about the debt burden after graduation. In Jamaica, in 1973, the Student Loan Bureau was established. It still uses a mortgage-type loan arrangement, reliance on guarantors. Interestingly, in the 1970s, as was the case with other territories, TNT, Barbados, the government would finance tuition. In 1986, the government in Jamaica decided to change that policy and basically said that student must contribute to their education. Unfortunately, I was a part of that group. I was about to go into my final year in my bachelor's program, and we locked down the campus for months between February and March 1986. And they negotiated, and it started about 10% or so during that time. Very trying period for us at the time. So before that, the student loan would lend for the costs, the general maintenance costs and so forth, like for hall fees and that kind of thing. People like me would go to the bank waiting to see if my name on the list coming during for that time. But as a result of the change in 1986, the focus was now on the provision of loan for the payment of that so-called contribution of students, the tuition fees. The means test as well is used. Over 10,000 students apply for loans per year in Jamaica, according to the SLB data 2020. 90% approval rate. Over 51 billion Jamaican dollars in loans have been granted to over 330,000 beneficiaries between 1970 and 2020. And a study of 26 institutions in Jamaica showed that 22 were beneficiaries, were the students, of the thing. And the main problem was that of finding guarantors. TNT, Student Revolving Loan, established in 1973 with the same purpose. Maximum loan disbursement at the time, 96,000. Means testing allowed. Use again. There's arrangement with the commercial banks and the Republic Bank of TNT, Royal Bank of TNT, and Scotia Bank are major players here. Suggested improvements. Win states that the best solution for the inadequacies in this current student loan system is the income contingent loan scheme. All right? And we know that you'll pay based on your ability to. And this would ensure that people who need it will be able to access it. Student loan systems in the region should implement measures which ease the debt burden of borrowers upon graduation and facilitate institutional strengthening. Measures such as a reduction in interest rates, deferring interest on loans during the grace period after graduation, increasing loan limits, particularly in the Eastern Caribbean, making loan structures more borrower-friendly, granting loans for advanced degrees, linking loan repayment to social security and income tax systems, as is done in Ghana and Australia, developing a credit bureau, the development of credit bureaus within the region would also help to track and monitor delinquent borrowers, and the link with their international partners would also help to ensure that people don't slip through the net. Because people think when they migrate, that's it. So you need to have that kind of connection. And so this continuation of the requirements for guarantors, this will go a far way in addressing the concerns of many borrowers as well as systemic deficiencies. Governments in the region should offer more incentive to commercial banks to provide student loans, as is done in TNT. And it's critical that student loan systems within the region adopt the suggestions cited in order to play their role in making HE more accessible to people of all age groups, so that they may in turn contribute to the region's development. So by way of conclusion, we would have looked at the development of HE globally and the development of HE within the Caribbean, and looking at how it's financed generally within the global space and within the Caribbean context, as well as looking at the systems within the Caribbean and the role that they play within the system.
Yes, please move the applause for Dr. Nesbeth. Thank you very much, Dr. Nesbeth, for that well done presentation. You gave us an excellent historical perspective and a current situation analysis of the development of higher education and financing in higher education, and then the comparative look at student loan systems across the Caribbean. We thank you very much, Dr. Nesbeth, and I'm sure the audience who are from different territories can identify with the points you made. I would love to either put a point of interest or ask questions at this time with regards to the presentation. So we're opening the floor for a few questions. We have a time constraint, so we'll be going very, very long with the questions, and we'll come as fast and furious as possible. So microphones, roving microphones are on. One for the presenter, please. Any response, any feedback from the presentation with regards to the perspectives and higher education financing and students' loan systems? Dr. Kofi Young.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Just to note, in your conclusion, you noted the recommendation from WINC from 2006 about the income contingent loan scheme as the way forward. And to note that, well, it's almost 20 years now, and yet still that recommendation has not been accepted or implemented. And to locate that within the context of the dependency on an efficient tax collection system that is predicated on, because the Australian system is based on that efficient system, and no other country has been able to replicate the Australian tax collection system, and this is why the Australian system is so important. And I want to put in the context that this is one of the reasons why in the Jamaican system, the emphasis on improving the tax collection system and the implementation of NIDS is so important, because that will now lead to an improvement in the tax collection system, so it will make it more, applicable for an income contingent loan scheme to put in place. So I just wanted to put that on the table, that so much more is needed, and dependent on the new identification system for development in the country. In Jamaica, rather.
Ms. Wansam.
Right.
Come to the...
Yes, indeed, there's a lot of work to be done, but there are two issues here. One, the income contingent system in terms of repayment, meaning it would be based on the earnings. So that is one point. The other point is the collection, and as we know, there's an issue with the tax system in respect. There would have been attempts to address that issue in Jamaica, and you talk about needs as well coming on to streamline that process. But, if we are serious as a people about getting things done, it can be done. But the problem is, if truth be told, sectoral interests within our spaces tend to determine what gets done when and where. And that is the problem that we face, not only in Jamaica, but I dare say in other Anglophone territories. And so that the governments are there to lead, and they must lead and must continue to improve processes like tax collection, etc. And if the Australians can do it, so can we. And if you know the history of who went to Australia to populate Australia, so good can come out of Babylon or whatever you want to call it. So I'm just saying that if there is a will, and in other words, if there is consensus to locate it in ACHEA and decent conversation, if consensus can be found within the region and within the jurisdictions, then we can go forward.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nesbeth. I think we are going to close at this point. Very thorough indication, really. So thanks very much for your presentation. And in closing, I think Dr. Nesbeth's presentation has laid the foundation for some further studies. One, on the attitude of students towards student loan systems, and two, the profile of students who access student loan systems across the Caribbean. So next year, we'll hear from someone else, so perhaps Dr. Nesbeth, for the follow-up research on the profile and the attitude. Thank you very much, everybody.